Welcome to Free Thoughts, a podcast project of libertarianism.org and the Cato Institute. I'm Trevor Burrus.
And I'm Aaron Powell.
Joining us today is John C. Goodman, Senior Fellow at the Independent Institute and President and Founder of the Goodman Institute for Public Policy Research. He is the author of Priceless, Curing the Healthcare Crisis, and the new book, A Better Choice, Healthcare Solutions for America. He is also the co-author of 1992's Patient Power from the Cato Institute. He has been called the father of health savings accounts. Welcome to Free Thoughts, John.
Glad to be with you.
So I'd like to start with the title of your last book, as you mentioned in your newest book, which is a sort of summation of parts of your last book. But the title of your last book, Priceless, is an intentional double entendre.
It is.
So in what way is the American healthcare system priceless?
Well, in one sense, there are no real prices in the medical marketplace, and it's priceless in that sense. But at the same time, your health care is priceless, and I wanted to get both of those ideas across.
So how do we get to a priceless – I mean, it's a very big question, but and it's almost the entire question of this podcast, but how do we get to a priceless American healthcare system?
Well, how we got there was over a 100-year period. We have completely suppressed normal market forces, and we've done it year after year, decade after decade, until we reach a point where no one sees a real price for anything, no doctor, no patient, no employer, no employee.
What does that mean to not see a real price, though? Because if I go to the doctor, I get a bill, and it's got costs on it, so there is a price I'm looking at.
Well, when you walk in the doctor's office and you ask what this is going to cost, they probably don't know. And there is no real price there. It's they have different payment rates from different insurers, so depending on whether you have Blue Cross or Aetna or Medicare, the reimbursement or the payment would be different. Those aren't real prices. That's not what happens in a normal market. You don't go to a restaurant and you pay one fee and the table next to you pays a different fee for the same food.
So what happened, I mean, in 1935, just pulling a random year, there was health insurance, I assume. Was it, or did it exist in the before then, or?
Well, there was very little then, but over the period of the 20th century, principally because of the American Medical Association, people did get pushed into health insurance schemes that, and we encouraged through the tax law for people to use insurance rather than out-of-pocket payment, third-party insurance rather than self-insurance through a health savings account. We encourage through the tax law people to get group insurance through an employer rather than have it on their own because the tax advantages are there. And because there's an open-ended tax subsidy, we encourage people to overinsure. So at the end of the day, we have insurance companies paying almost all the bills. And when third-party insurers, by that I mean insurance companies and government and employers, when they're paying all the bills instead of the patient, the providers no longer are competing for us on the basis of price and quality and access to care.
And so out-of-pocket was probably most of the way that medical costs were paid for in the 30s. Insurance starts to come around in the 50s, and the first big U.S. program is Medicare and Medicaid, correct? Like big top-down programs.
Those are the first big government programs, and they're huge. And we have almost 50 million people in Medicare and maybe 70 million people or so in Medicaid. So these are huge programs and all run by government, and all the bills are paid by government.
How do those affect the price of health care in general? They have effects on the price.
You mean the cost?
Yes, on the cost, yeah.
Well, we didn't have a serious healthcare inflation problem until 1965 when we got Medicare and Medicaid. Interestingly, there's not a lot of evidence that the introduction of Medicare made much difference for the health care of the elderly, but we definitely spent a lot of money, our taxpayer money, and that additional spending, billions and billions of dollars, forced up prices. And it's been going on ever since.
But how much of that is policy forcing up prices, and how much of that is simply medical care becoming more sophisticated? Because, I mean, medical care prior to the 20th century, for all intents and purposes, didn't really exist. I mean, there wasn't much they could do, and what they could do was pretty cheap. But then we had radical explosion in what we're capable of, which brought a whole lot of technology, and that stuff's expensive.
Well, it's expensive because we reward the kind of technology that increases costs and therefore increases payments by third-party payers. You know, if you contrast this with a field like cosmetic surgery or LASIK surgery where there are no third-party payers, we've had in those two fields tremendous innovation, innovation and technological advance, and yet the real price keeps coming down. So in a normal market, technological improvement tends to lower costs. Only in healthcare does it continue to raise costs.
But aren't those? I mean, those things are elective surgeries. They're not necessary care. You can choose not to get LASIK, and you can get glasses, which are good enough, and you can choose not to get cosmetic surgery. And so, to some extent, we're very price sensitive on that. Like they have to keep costs down, right? Or people will just opt out. But cancer treatments you can't opt out of.
Kidney dialysis, heart attacks.
And those also have a huge technological component.
Yes, but you're not focusing on the right variable here. People can choose not to do a lot of things in healthcare. A lot of people who could use a knee replacement don't choose to get their knee replaced. So there's a lot of choices are being made. But that's not what's critical here. What's critical is who pays the bill. And when we pay the bill ourselves, there's never a question about price. We know when you go in for cosmetic surgery procedure, you know in advance what the price is going to be. Same for LASIK surgery. Same for the walk-in clinics. Wherever the third parties aren't, you know what the prices are. And you also know that the providers are competing for your business based on price, quality, and access.
How much of this, though, is do we want prices in there in the sense that do we want people facing these bills and making those decisions when they're in a highly vulnerable state? You've just found out that you have pancreatic cancer. You're not necessarily thinking straight. You're in stages of grief, and now you have to make these decisions about whether you want to bankrupt your family in order to support yourself. That it seems like, if we analogize out to there are other areas where people are in highly emotional states, right, when they buy stuff, where there are markets, and yet the prices are extraordinary. Something like the wedding and funeral industry. There's competition in the wedding and funeral industry, but it doesn't seem to be doing much. The prices are extraordinary, certainly way above what they would need to be to have even enormous profits in these things. But people just can't think straight when a loved one has just died, or when they're about to have the most important day of their life,
or when they have pancreatic cancer.
Right. And so do we want you could make the argument that look, we want to protect them from that. We want them to not have to think about that and just be able to get the health care that they need.
What we want is what Adam Smith wrote about 200 years ago, and that is we want people on the producer-supplier side to find it in their self-interest to meet our needs. And that's what's critical here. It makes it more difficult if it's an emotional situation, but people can have advisors. They can have doctor advisors, and that works quite well. But if on the supply side of the market people are not trying to meet our needs, if they're not competing on price and quality and access, then they're not going to meet our needs very well.
How do you react when someone says, which I'm sure you've had many times, and maybe you've already answered this question, that healthcare is a right?
Well, I react by saying that no country in the world has made healthcare right. It's just rhetoric. If you live in Canada, you don't have a right to any particular medical procedure. You don't have a right to an MRI scan. You don't even have a right to a place in line. If you're the 50th heart patient waiting for surgery, you're not entitled to the 50th surgery. Other people can get in front of you. In fact, Americans can go up and pay the hospital and get ahead of you.
You mean just as a matter of both legal, they don't have a right to it legally, and they don't have a right to it functionally?
Yes, and yet they continue to use the language of rights because it somehow makes everybody feel good. So the right to health care has no content as far as I'm concerned. That is meaningless. What is meaningful is designing a health care system that meets people's needs efficiently and does so at minimum cost and produces high-quality results and doesn't make us wait for months or years to get it.
And that's something you've written about a lot in all of your books, but the time price versus the money price. Can you explain a little bit how that works?
Well, people on the left tend to ignore the time price of care, and that's because they believe in healthcare systems where money plays no real role, money from the patient. And so instead of rationing on the basis of price, we ration by waiting. By the way, we've also done that in our country. We wait for care everywhere. We just don't wait as long as the Canadians wait. But waiting is costly. Time is valuable. The walk-in clinics in the CVS pharmacies are called minute clinics. And the reason for that term is they're suggesting to you they know your time is valuable as well as your money, And that's what we would expect to happen in a real market for health care.
But don't those emergency those clinics, urgent care, they take our insurance. I mean, how are they different from the hospitals and wherever else? And they also don't tell me. I mean, I take my kids to urgent care, and they don't tell us the prices up front. But we also don't wait very long.
Well, at the walk-in clinics, they came into existence to cater to people who were paying out of pocket with their own money. Now, through time, the insurers began to pay for their services because they realized that this is much cheaper than having the patient go to the doctor's office or the emergency room. But essentially, it was a market formed to deal with people paying with their own money, and generally, when people pay with their own money, they're not asked to guess what the price is going to be. So, at the MinuteClinic, you actually have a price list, and if you have an earache or sore throat, you know in advance what you're going to pay. So, this is what happens in a normal market.
Now, some people I can hear my left-wing friends in my ear, and I understand the argument. Some people say that, well, this is entirely unfair, that you shouldn't have to think about how much health care you need. You shouldn't have to think about whether or not you have enough money to fix your knee or fix anything, whether rich people can have a knee and you can't have a knee is fundamentally unfair. We need to fix that in some way as a matter of simple justice. It needs to be fixed by paying for it from above or subsidizing or doing price controls or anything like this. That just the basic premise of people paying for health care is unfair.
Yes, I'm moving the opposite direction. I think a lot of evidence is out there that people can manage their own health care with a little bit of training, instructions from providers. And if people are going to manage their care, they'll do a better job if they manage the money that pays for that care. So I believe in health savings accounts. I would make it easier for employers and insurance companies to put money into health savings accounts, that people are willing to manage their own care. And people need to always be conscious that health care costs money. And if they know what the real cost is, then they can make trade-offs. Imagine a mother who wakes up in the middle of the night and her daughter is sick. Does she take that daughter to the emergency room or not? Who's the best person to make that decision? The mother is. So the mother should know what the cost is, and she is in the best position to evaluate the need.
How much of a difference does it make where that money they're spending comes from? So if they are spending their own money out of their pocket and they're seeing the prices and they're choosing